Hi class, I wanted to show you how to access the MS-DOS prompt or the command line interface for Windows 8, Windows 7, Windows 10. They're all the same. You should also have your PuTTY icon set up from week 1 where we installed and connected with PuTTY. So let's do that first. So I will click on PuTTY. We get this window here. I will type CIS 170.ddns.net and make sure it's set to SSH with port 22. I'm also going to set the keyboard to backspace to Control H. That helps it function a little bit nicer. And then I get my login prompt right here. And I am set up the exact same way you are. So I get to my login prompt right here. This right here is my prompt that I use. It's set up with my username, and it's got the machine name. The machine name is Raspberry Pi. That's the host name I've set on the Raspberry Pi server itself. This tilde is interesting. We're going to get to that a little bit later, but it's a very interesting concept and you'll see it very clearly. So now what I'd like to do is I'd like to open up the command line interface for Windows, which is also known as the DOS prompt, either way you want to refer to it. So we will click on the Start button, and as you can see it's right there. That's because I pinned this a long time ago. But I'm going to type CMD because that's going to be similar to what it is for you. Depending on what your Windows version is, you might have to set this up a little bit differently, because if it's Windows 7 it's a slightly different process. You might have to click on Run, but if you type CMD you will have command prompt access whether you're typing Run or whether you start it from Windows 10. So as you can see, these two screens look very, very different. Okay, so now going to Linux for a second, we want to be in the root of Linux because that's what we're going to go from. So if you remember from our first week with our tree, we're going to type CD, which is the change directory command, and we're going to put a // and that will take us to our very base root directory. And as you can see, your prompt here has changed a little bit because we are going to be starting from the root. You've already seen me do this as well, but these are some of the path names that we discussed in week 1. Now if we look at the Windows system, and if you'll excuse me for a second, I'm going to throw a thumb drive in real quickly here just to give you a better idea of the difference. So you probably just saw that come up, so now I have that other drive. That other drive is not going to be lettered by C. So on a Windows machine there's going to be roots for each drive that's connected, whether that be a flash drive, whether that be a external CD, whether it's a CD-ROM, whether it's a DVD that you're putting in. It's going to have a root of that. It's going to have a root for that specific drive. So most computers start off with the C drive. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to type CD /. Now you'll notice the backslash goes the other direction in Windows. Newer versions of Windows have made this much more compatible, so the slash can go either way. However, this is the standard Windows way to do things. So if we go like this, we're now in the root of the C drive. Okay? So that being said, if I do a dir here, some of these are some standard paths too, such as users, such as Windows, such as program files and program files x86. These are standard folders that come with the Windows system. So also, I don't know if I mentioned the Windows directory. That's definitely one as well. So now, off of this, we understand what's going on. So I want to go back to your home directory on the Linux machine, and we're going to do that in just a second. Thank you. So we were left off talking about home directories. I'll show you how this appears in a Windows system first. Okay, so going here under users, that's going to be the start of the home directory on almost all Windows machines. So there's going to be the users directory. Okay, and then there's all users, that's set up by default, and then there's also default, which is set up by default, and then there's going to be your directory. That's going to be how you're logged in. So that's the directory you're going to have permission to. So that's where we're going to go right now. So if I hit enter there, this is the home directory for my user on the Windows system. As you'll notice, there was no login on the Windows system because I'm already logged in. When I started up Windows, this is where I was set up. This is the user I logged in as. So that's a one-shot deal. If you were remoting into a Windows machine, that would be different. You would have to key in a password. So there's no real shortcut to get to your user directory in Windows or using the DOS command prompt. There's a couple ways we can do this on a Linux system or a Unix system. We can, on most Unix systems, this is not 100% true. It's true most of the time, but different flavors of Unix, some of the older flavors don't have this exact same setup, and the paths might be different. So Unix has given us the tilde command, which I mentioned a few minutes ago. And if I hit the tilde command, I now see the tilde right here, and this is my home directory. So if I do an ls-l, well, actually we're going to hold off on the ls-l, but if I type a pwd, this tells me my current working directory. So if I hit pwd here and hit enter, I'm in home Glen. So that is my home directory, just like users Glen on MS-DOS or Windows would be my home directory. So now, if I were to go ahead and proceed, you'd understand. So if I type cd home Glen, then you'll notice my tilde still hasn't left here because I'm still in my home directory. It's the same thing. This is what's called, this tilde is what's called an alias. So that's the difference between understanding where your home directories are. And for the purpose of this assignment, we're going to be working with these home directories quite a bit. So that being said, we're going to do most of our work here, but I want you to understand how everything else flows. If we were looking at a Windows system as well, I can open up the File Explorer, which you've all seen the File Explorer before. Okay? So let me see here. So if I click on my local C drive, I click on Users, and I click on Glen, which is me, some of these folders will seem familiar to you, such as Documents, Downloads, there's the Videos folder, there's a folder I created, this one, Installers. But this is where your desktop, that's a pretty common one. So if I click here, these are the files on my desktop. And if I was showing my whole desktop, you'd see that. It works very similar in Linux. So I hope you understand the concept of your home directory. It's going to be your starting directory that you work in. It's going to be the directory that you have the freedom, that's your space on that server. A lot of times, depending on the philosophy of the system administrator, they'll either give you a lot of space in your home directory and want you to do your work there, or they won't. On a Windows PC, they can also limit the size and space, but Windows can also use a roaming profile as part of your home directory, but we're not going to go into that now. So I think I've beaten the idea of the home directory into your heads a little bit, which I hope I have. If not, please email me with questions. Thank you very much. So now we're going to go on and we're going to discuss how you would list files and directories. So we'll start with the command prompt, or we'll start with the command line interface, the DOS prompt, however you want to refer to it here on the Windows side. So in Windows, the command to list a directory is dir. That stands for directory. So if I hit enter here, you're going to see the same files and folders that I showed you using the File Explorer in Windows. So, going to my home directory, these folders and files right here will look the same as this when I've done a dir to list them out. Okay? So on the Linux side, to do a dir, it's ls. and there's definitely not as much in our home directories here on the Linux side because nothing's been created yet. I do not have the GUI set up here, but that would be the way that you list out the files here. So as you can see, by default, when I type dir in Windows, I know the date that the directory was created, I know the time that it was updated, I know that it's a directory rather than a file, and I know the actual name of it that's been given. So in DOS you get a lot more information right off the top of your head. In Linux you have to do an ls-l, which means listing in detail. So ls-l will give you the same type of information. A lot of times you'll notice the colors change. I can go into that a little bit on your Unix systems and your older systems. The colors aren't going to be set for you here. So this pretty much gives us the same information. I'm going to skim through the Linux stuff a little bit quickly here because I'm going to skip some stuff because we're going to go into that later. But as you can see, we see the date that the file was created. We can see the time that it was created. And this right here, I can tell this is a symbolic link, or a shortcut is what they're referred to in Windows, but we're not going to go into that right now either. So you can see, and obviously the name. So obviously you can see that you get the same information and actually even more in Linux by doing an ls-l. So if you'd like to learn a little bit more about how the dir command works, we can type dir, a slash, and a question mark, and this will give you all the different parameters we can use with the dir command. So here they are right here. So it gives you a description of what it does. It also gives you the syntax for how it should be set up. You can list out the attributes, you can do the sort order. The /a, you can list out specific attributes. So if you wanted to see hidden files, you could do the /a, and then you could put the attribute you want to see in. So let's try that one first, okay? Because sometimes you do want to see hidden files. Okay, so let's do a dir /a and a colon, and we'll type an H for hidden files. So these are all the files that you have in your directory that you don't see. These are hidden at the system level, and there's quite a bit there that you're not going to see because it's all hidden, like I said. If you wanted to see hidden files in Linux and you needed to see help on it, you could look at the man page. That's man, that stands for manual, and that is pretty much the same in Linux and Unix. You will see the man page being your help screen. So I'll type man ls because ls is the directory listing, and it brings up the help. You can hit the space bar or the enter key to scroll around through here. You can hit the arrow up or down to scroll through and get the different commands. So reading through that, in Linux it's ls. If we do an ls-l, that gives us the whole listing, and we type an a will give us the hidden files. So we're going to go on, I'm going to stop here, but we're going to go on and discuss hidden files in Linux in a second because there is something different to setting them between the two systems. Thank you. So as we can see here, when I did just the regular ls-l for the full listing, I had one file here. When I do an ls-la, I have quite a few more files. I have my .profile, my .bash rc, and my .bash logout. So the interesting thing to notice here is that there's a period in front of each one of these file names. So this is also interesting. When you want to hide a file in Linux, you preface the file name with a period, and that's how it's hidden. On a Windows machine, if you want to hide a file, you set the attributes with the attrib command. We will go into that sometime down the road. But you can use the attrib command and set an attribute for hidden. So that part works very differently between the two systems. So I wanted to show you that the file names in Linux or Unix, when they're hidden, are prefaced with a period. These files are interesting here. This has to do with the parent and child path names. Okay, and It's going to be a little more obvious in Windows, but this is pretty easy in Linux as well. One thing I wanted to show you here, you know, when I went to Linux the first time and I typed ls, it just gave me the file name listing. If I wanted to do that in Windows, it's not the default setting. I could do a dir/w to get a listing of all the different folders and what have you. So the fact that they've got the brackets around them, that indicates that they're directories. I wanted to bring that to your attention. And like I said, if you type help dir on the Windows side, or if you type man ls on the Linux side, you'll get a lot more information and be able to do a lot more moving around with that. So I'm thinking I'm going to include something with that, with the man pages in our homework, because I won't be able to make you experts at Windows or Linux with this short 8-week class. There's just not enough time, and I'd have to give you way too much homework, and I don't think you want me to do that. So my goal is to get everybody started so that you can learn for yourselves and teach yourselves. Being an Albertus graduate myself, I think it's important for IT majors to know how to get through pretty much every operating system here. So I want you all to be able to know how to use every single type of operating system environment that's common, and Linux is very common. Mac OS X is very common too, and believe it or not, many years ago, maybe like 10-15 years ago, Steve Jobs decided to use the Berkeley Systems Development version of Unix to pattern Mac OS X around. So believe it or not, the underlying structure and concept behind Mac OS X is also based on Linux. So that gives you a huge, huge shortcut. And if you were to access the terminal on Mac OS X, just like the instructions explained in week 1 for the Mac users, that has very similar directory structures and paths that you'd see on a Linux machine, because Mac OS X is based on Unix, which is an excellent idea. So that being said, I'm going to wrap it up for talking about listing files and directories, and we're going to go on to making files and directories. Thank you very much. Alright, I'm back. So now we were going to discuss the concept of making directories. This is a very short and simple command. You'll have your basic permissions that are set for both. Since you created this, you'll have no trouble accessing it, whether you're using a Windows command prompt or whether you're using the Windows File Explorer or whether you're using a different operating system such as Linux altogether. So first what we're going to do is we're going to go to this user Glenn directory here, going through File Explorer. So now if I look here, it's kind of split up a little bit, but if I click on the URL, it's C users Glenn, the same way it's C users Glenn right here. So that being said, if I wanted to create a directory here using the File Explorer, I can simply right click, I can say new, and I can pick a new folder right here. So we're going to call this folder CIS 170. Okay, so now you can see that folder exists here. If I do a dir here, I'm going to do a /w because it'll be easier to see. You'll see somewhere, it should be here, you'll see that I have CIS 170 as a folder that I've just created here. So I'm going to delete this here for now. And I'm going to come back to the command prompt. At the command prompt, you type mkdir CIS 170, and that's how you create the other directory. Now when I hit enter here, I want you to watch this window right here, and you'll see the file get created the same way you saw it get created from the DOS prompt side. And there it is. It just created itself. Okay, so now I'm going to teach you how to remove a directory. So that's rmdir CIS, and I'm going to just type CI here just to show you that you can hit the tab key, and if there's no other conflicting words out there in your directory, it'll finish it for you. So now I've just removed it, and as you can see, it left here as well. Now let's try and do this on the Linux side. So the commands and the command syntax is almost the same, but it is a little bit different. So to make a directory, it's md CIS 170. Oh, I'm sorry, it's mkdir CIS 170. And as you can see, it's almost the same between the two systems. If I were to do an ls here, I now have a CIS 170 directory, and after a while you can't take these colors as the rule for every system, but there is some idea, and you'll get better at understanding what these different colors mean as we go through. And if I type rmdir CIS 170, and try that again, I can hit the tab key here too, by the way. So I do that, I've just removed the CIS 170 directory. So that's an idea of how the different possible ways to make a directory are. There's going to be some difficulty if you ever try and delete a directory that has stuff in it. These directories were empty, so when we start working with deleting files and what have you, we'll get a little bit more into that part. But I want, whether it's in Windows or whether it's in Linux, if the directory is not empty, it's going to be, there's a few more tricks to delete it. So using the File Explorer, that's scorched earth. If there's data in the folder, so I'm just going to create this new, I'm just going to call it new folder for now. And if I create a file here, I'll create a text file. I can just right click this and delete the whole thing here. I can't do that at the command prompt on either DOS or in Linux. Thank you. I'm going to skip around a little bit now, and we're going to talk about parent and child directories. When we look at the root on any system, we can think of that as the parent of all parents folders. So like I said, there's going to be there could be more than one parent of all parent folders on a Windows or DOS machine, because there's multiple roots depending on how many drives you have. So I can see here that when I plugged in my flash drive, excuse me, that it created an F drive for me. So if I click it here, there's quite a bit of stuff on it. Okay. So if I were to CD here, this is the parent of all parents on the C drive of this Windows computer. On the Raspberry Pi, same thing, slash just goes the other direction. So you're using the CD or change directory command. And as you can see, that's the same on both. However, if I were to type in CD backslash with no space on a Windows machine, it's not going to have any problem at all. If I type CD slash with no space here in Linux, it doesn't know what to do with it. So that's something to keep in mind, that the formatting is a little bit more specific than Linux. So now let's talk about the concept of parent and child directories here. Alright, so if I go here and I type pwd, sorry, wrong window. If I go here and type pwd, it shows me that I'm in the root folder. On the Windows machine, the prompt itself tells you what folder you're in. And you can set it up to do this in Linux as well, but most people use the pwd command. Okay, so now we're going to change directory to users. Okay, just for kicks. We'll do an ls, we'll cd to games. So now, let's look at this path right here. So the root is the root. That's the, like I said, that is going to be the ultimate parent directory. So user or USR here is a child folder to the root directory. And games is a child folder or directory to USR. So in this example here, we can look and see that USR is the parent to games. Games is the child to USR. And that's the same way on a Windows machine. When we're looking at the full path, let me cd users Glenn. Oh, I don't know what I did wrong there. Ah, that's kind of weird. Let me see why that didn't work. Huh, no idea. Anyway, if we look here, we've got the root of the C drive. That's the parent of parents on the C drive, and that's what root basically is. You have Glenn, which is a child to users, and users would be the parent to Glenn. And this chain can continue on and on. So when we look at this, we look at the parent and child directories, and we need to understand what they are. Something interesting here, if I do an ls-la, which we recall, that is the hidden attribute. We're going to see, wow, look at this, no games on this machine at all. If I would have just done an ls-l, I wouldn't have gotten anything. So if we look at this dot right here, just the single dot, we can cd to that. It didn't do anything because the cd dot is the current working directory. If you wanted to get to the parent directory, it's cd dot dot. So if I go cd dot dot and watch the prompt, it comes back and gives me user again. So if I do an ls-ltr or la here, I get these various files here. I have the current working directory which I'm in, and then I could go to the parent folder or parent directory of user. That's going to be root. So if I type cd dot dot, I'm in the root. Thank you. So now I'd like to go into a little bit more detail on the cd command. As we know, in the Linux window, if we type cd dot dot, at this point there's no further area back. It can't go anywhere else. So let's go to cd user, and we'll go back to games again, just for the example here. So if I type in cd slash, it's going to put me in the root directory, because that's specifying that you want to go from the root directory. So if I wanted to cd to home, I start from the root. I start from the root right here. I go to home and then Glenn. Okay? So I type, this is what's called an absolute path, because the absolute path always starts from the root. Okay? So if I were to go back to user games again, okay, now if I were to type the same command without putting the first / in to specify the root, and I just typed in cd home and then Glenn again here, it's not going to know what to do with it. So that's because it doesn't start from the home. Whereas in this games directory here, if I were to create a file, actually we're going to wait on that just a little bit. We're going to do this from my home directory. I don't want to mess up the games directory right now. So if I were to create a folder here, we'll call it temp for now because we are going to get rid of it. Okay, we do a pwd just to show us that we're in our home folder. So now let's look at the different ways we can get to temp. So I could type cd temp, oops, that was a little slow, and I'm in the temp folder. So that's very helpful and good to know. So then we can go back, and we're back in our home folder again. If we wanted to use the absolute path to access the temp folder, we could type cd / home Glenn and then temp. So that puts me in the same place. This is the absolute path. When I do just the cd temp from the path that I'm currently in, that's going to be the relative path. Whenever I write an installer process or what have you, you usually don't know what path you're in. So absolute paths are much safer. They can also be much more redundant. So something to keep in mind here. I'm going to go back to the user directory for just a second to show you another way we could do things, which is going to be a little bit clunkier, but I want you to understand that this kind of concept is possible. So here we're in the user folder. I'm going to type cd dot dot, which is going to take me back to the parent, which in this case the parent is root. I'm going to type a forward slash, I'm going to type home, and then I'm going to type Glenn again. And then I'm actually going to type temp again. So that puts me back in the same place. However, in this case I was starting in a user folder. I went back one level using the dot dot that takes me back to the parent. Then the parent is root, so then I can proceed to the home temp Glenn. So that's something I use quite a bit. You don't really have the dot dot abilities the same way in Windows, but they are there. They do work quite similar. So I could do a cd dot dot, and I could go to default here. Okay, so that's not working. So here I do a dot dot, it brings me back a little bit. Like I said, it works somewhat differently using the dot dot command here. That's about all I have to say about the relative paths and absolute paths. So the absolute paths and the relative paths work the same way here. I'll do a quick one here. So I'm in the Glenn directory. All right, so if I do a cd dot dot, it takes me back to users. If I do a cd Glenn, I can go there. I could do a cd backslash, which takes me to the root of the drive I'm on, which is C in this case. So we kind of got interrupted there. I apologize for that. So you see that they work very similar between changing directories and finding your way around from parent and child directories. But I want you to come away understanding the child and parent paths here. So in the relative and absolute paths, that's really important to understand. If you have any questions, please let me know. Real quickly, I wanted to show you that it works very similar from this window here. So I can do the same thing. It's much easier because it's a lot more point and click. So something to keep in mind. Thank you. So we're going to move slowly in this class because I know this is new to a lot of you. To a lot of you, it's going to be review. For the on-ground class, we're going to go through these exercises in class, and we're going to do some playing around with this to get a better understanding. For the fully online students, you're going to want to, this might be complete review for some of you, which is great if it is. But for some people, this is a totally foreign concept. So I'm trying to keep this moving along, and like I said, I know for some this is very simple, basic stuff, and you've already seen it. But there's other people who've probably never been at the Linux or Unix prompt of anything before. So I want to kind of go along on the same pace. So if you're in the online class and you haven't worked with the DOS prompt, or you haven't worked with a Linux prompt before, besides just doing your assignment, I'd like you to be able to go ahead and play around with some of these commands that we've used. I'd like you to go through the man pages. I'm going to put some of this in the assignment, but have a good understanding. The thing with this class is each lesson in each week is going to build on the previous week, and you can get behind it here pretty quickly. So play around with these commands. There's plenty of sites to Google and research this stuff. Like I said, I'm looking up blog postings, and I'm looking up different sites and different explanations all over the place all the time. That's part of being a computer professional. So understand that and work around with it. I expect you to have a good understanding of this going into week 3. And for the on-ground students, I'll be working with you directly in class. And as always, good luck with your assignments, and thank you very much.